And we've also been speaking to one of this year's Nobel Prize winners, Dr. Randy Schekman. Well, first of all, thank you very much indeed taking the time to talk to us. We appreciate that.
My pleasure.
Now, how exciting was that to win the Nobel Prize?
I highly recommend it. It was the experience was both exhilarating and exhausting. They put you through all the paces during 10 weeks in Stockholm. Interviews. And
10 weeks?
10 days, did I say 10 weeks? It only seems like 10 weeks. 10 days. Interviews. I don't think you see this in the U.S., but in Sweden, the Nobel laureates are treated like rock stars. So as soon as I got out of the limo going to the hotel, there was like paparazzi. People flocked to me. They downloaded my picture from the internet, and I had to sign. Constantly, every time I got to the point where I had to shoo them away.
So that's not the role of scientists in the US then?
No, I'm afraid not. Just as well. I think there was a bit overkill there, but they really put on quite a show, and people would stop me in the street. I mean, as I was coming home, my flight to Copenhagen on my way back to San Francisco, there was some woman with her child who congratulated me. So.
Now, forgive me for getting this horribly wrong, but my very basic understanding of your research is sort of how cells communicate.
So proteins are manufactured inside cells. Most of them do their thing inside of cells, but about 10% of them, depending on the cell type, are manufactured for export. And there's a special conveyor mechanism that allows things to be exported. That has to segregate them from things that are designed for domestic consumption, if you will. And that machinery was first revealed using the electron microscope by George Palade, who won the Nobel Prize in 1974. Jim Rothman and I developed independent methods to understand the mechanism of this process, to really get into the nuts and bolts of the process, the molecules that actually control that process. So that's what we were credited for.
And when this process doesn't go quite right, that can lead to some major problems.
Yeah, there are a few diseases that we've been studying that have defects in genes that we discovered in yeast. We did most of our work in yeast. And this is a highly conserved process, over 1 billion years of evolution. And so when something goes bad, it can go catastrophically bad.
Now, you were ASCB president, weren't you? Was it 1999?
Yes.
You were ASCB president. So how important is the role of the ASCB to cell biologists?
Well, ASCB is, I think, unusual among scientific societies in doing a lot, not just putting on a meeting, but running programs for students, young scholars. It's very politically active in Washington. It really was instrumental in starting the Congressional Caucus, which is the largest caucus for Congress people on a theme of science in Washington. So they do a lot, and so there's a tremendous resource there that's available for all cell biologists, in fact not just in this country but around the world. And so they put on an outstanding annual meeting too. The annual meeting is the source of revenue for the society for all the good things that it does. And so they put a lot of thought, I would say much more so than other scientific societies, into the organization of the symposia and in having additional programs that young people find value in. And it's a big meeting, so that isn't necessarily the best to be a big meeting. On the other hand, it brings great speakers in, and young people have an opportunity to meet and see these more senior people in action, and in a way that they wouldn't have if they were trying to get into some more selective small meeting.
Right. That's important, isn't it? There's a lot of young people here this week, and for them to get the chance to meet and see people like yourself, that's important.
Yeah, they have luncheon tables where the speakers sit and talk with students and postdocs. So I always found it to be an unusually effective society. And so as a result, they draw a big crowd, even as the attendance at other large society meetings has declined.
Can I just pick up on something else that you're active with recently, open science?
Yeah, open access.
Open access.
Open access, yeah.
How do you define that?
Well, so open access is not something that started with, I'm the editor-in-chief of a new journal called eLife that's sponsored by Howard Hughes, Wellcome Trust, and Max Planck Society. We certainly didn't start open access. That was started by a British outfit called BMC, Biomed Central. some years ago. But the biggest proponent of open access has been a series of journals published by something called the Public Library of Science, PLOS. And open access is where all the fees are paid either by sponsors or by the investigator, and not through a subscription. So, which means that anyone can read the literature anywhere they are, whether they're a member of a university or a society or anything. They can. So the public, who have, after all, paid for the science for the most part, now can have access to the literature if they want. So it's a challenge to the commercial basis of publication, particularly the private commercial firms have been reluctant to embrace open access, but it's slowly taking hold. And the three organizations that fund eLife felt strongly that there was a need at the high end for a selective but open access journal that was run by active scientists. And so we have very high standards for publishing our work, but it's open access, and all the decisions are made by active scientists. So I wrote an article, an editorial in the Guardian last week that challenged the most selective journals, and I challenged their policies. I refer to them as the luxury journals, and I compared them to the ladies' fashion industry, restricting the number of copies of, in this case, of journal papers to kind of really emphasize some, I would say, false exclusivity. And so there's a lot of displeasure in the community about these journals, specifically Cell, Nature, and Science. And the problem is that young scholars over the past 10 or 15 years have felt that they have to have their papers in those three journals
right.
if they're going to succeed at all, if they're going to get a job. And this has really put undue pressure. I think it's distorted the system, and it's put undue pressure on people to try to make their work appear more fashionable than it is, or to even use fashion as a criterion.
Right.
So anyway, of course the publishers of these three journals have not taken my comments lightly, and they're going on the counterattack.
A debate's always a good thing, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time. Again, many congratulations, and thank you very much.
My pleasure.